amazing idea. For those of you who I have not met yet, my name is Melissa Schroeder. I'm the morning anchor for 44 News. If you're not familiar, we just started our news program back up about a year ago. You can watch us from 4:30 a.m. until 9 in the morning. And of course, I want to thank all the veterans in the audience for your service. I just love hearing you guys' stories. So those of you who I've met, I've been super impressed and I can't wait to learn more. With that, I'd like everybody to stand as we go ahead and the Newburgh Post 44 Honor Guard presents colors and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Begin in forward arm. Forward, heart, left, 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 right, left, left. Detail, hold. Post color. Present arm. Please say with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order, arm. About face. Forward, arm. Forward, arm.
Nice job, thank you, gentlemen. And I just want to remind everyone, just so we show respect for our speakers, just to make sure you silence your cell phone. So we're going to go ahead and begin with Dr. Mark Browning. He's on the board of directors at the Freedom Heritage Museum.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. This is a very important day for the Freedom Heritage Museum and also all veterans. This is a veteran history program, and it's very important that we trap and capture information from all the previous wars of all the different soldiers. We're trying to capture everybody from World War II, Korean War, Vietnam War, and all subsequent wars, and have individuals tell their stories. These are important things that will happen, that will tell us more about our real history. A lot of the World War II veterans have not been open to talking about things till recently, but usually when they get above 80, sometimes they don't talk more about things. This is the Freedom Heritage Museum. We've been in existence since 2012, and we're hosting the event today. Thank you for having it here. The Freedom Heritage Museum is a museum that's going to tell Evansville and everybody around Evansville, the tri-state area, how much Evansville did in World War II, how important World War II was to the world. It was the biggest historical event that happened in the last century, and will probably be the biggest event that happens in the next century. I hope it's the biggest event that ever happens in the next century of that nature. But what we're trying to do at the Freedom Heritage Museum, there were 330 different products made in the Evansville area for World War II. There were 16 different factories that received E awards, and 26 E awards were given out. Only 4% of factories in the United States were given E awards. We are trying to capture that information about all the different factories of Evansville and make them available to people from the Evansville and tri-state area. That's our mission, and we will accomplish that mission. We do not have a P-47 in here, but hopefully in the near future we will have. We have the Honorable General Tweet to talk today. We're lucky to have him. He is a liaison to the more modern future. If you look at World War II, look what the P-47 did. We made 6,200 to 6,600 here in Evansville, 7,000 workers here at Rev Public Air, 35,000 support workers to make products for that airplane. The airplane was a great part of World War II. It weighed about 17,000 pounds. The pounds that General Tweak, the planes he flew, were about 62,000 pounds, about 3 times the size and about 4 times the speed. The P-47 was about 400 miles an hour. His planes were close to 1,600 miles an hour at max speed. But the P-47 was different than most fighters in World War II. You had fighters and bombers. It was a fighter and a bomber. Most fighters weighed about 10,000 pounds. The fighters were very nimble, but the P-47 served 2 purposes. It was a bomber, a fighter, and also shot missiles. And when we hear General Tweet this afternoon, he's going to talk about what happened in the 1960s and 70s with the Phantom jet, with the F-4, and what that did. It shot missiles, it dropped bombs, and it had fighter capability. So what we had here in Evansville was what happened, what was produced in World War II, or not World War, was produced in World War II, but it was what was a preface to the fighters in the Vietnam era. So what happened here was a preface. Most fighters in World War II only shot bullets, 20 caliber or 50 caliber. Our guns here shot 50 caliber guns. They dropped bombs up to 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of bomb load, where his planes had 12,000 pounds of load. And the other things that we did, the P-47, it shot missiles. They were not too accurate in World War II, but the missiles that the general will talk about were very accurate. And so 20 years later, the technology that happened here was a preface to what happened in the Vietnam era. So I think we need to understand that about the P-47, but there's so many other products and so many other people in Evansville that were involved in making these things. We hope that you talk to your relatives, talk to your friends, look in your garages, look in your attics, and there'll be some memorabilia, some old letters that we can try to preserve this history before it's gone and before it's an archaeological study. Now, this is a veteran history project. Our museum has also been involved in that. We've been interviewing, we have 240 both Korean and World War II veterans interviewed. We have them on DVD disc, and we need to continue that. And that's what part of this project's about. We've learned a lot from our lessons of World War II, Vietnam era, and subsequent wars. Wars are won by 3 things: by individuals, soldiers. Number 2, by machines. And number 3, by logistics. Evansville had the machines and helped with World War II. The logistics was done by FDR and all the superior officers in World War II, and we're going to hear about the Vietnam era. And the 3rd thing is the men and women that sacrificed their lives. This weekend is Memorial Day. I hope to see most of you attend the Memorial Day events. They're at about 10 different local cemeteries, and the attendance needs to be increased over time. I've been in most events for the last 30 years, and I think we need to see more people there to give respect to the people that gave the ultimate sacrifice. The ultimate sacrifice was 350 men in World War II in Evansville. It's 352 on the plaque down by the courthouse, and you look at the Vietnam Memorial, you look at the Korean Memorial. They have our veterans that gave the ultimate sacrifice. We have freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and those are cherished things that most other countries don't have. So I hope that some of you turn out to the veteran things, actually Memorial Day events that have been going on in this city for many, many years. And you need to attend that, but tomorrow I see some younger people here, but we need the younger generation here. So you bring your grandkids, bring your kids, bring your nieces and nephews. They need to understand about freedom, and that's what a lot of this is about today. So thank you for allowing us to be the host.
Thank you, Dr. Browning, a great message there. Okay, up next we're going to hear from Dr. Henry Davis, Associate Chief of Staff at the Marion, Illinois and Evansville, Indiana Veterans Medical Centers.
I would just like to take a minute here to recognize Clint Perry, our Navy corpsman who's orchestrated this whole event. I'd like to give him a hand. He's great. Very organized. I'd also like to thank people for the museum here for allowing us to use this space today, and also Jerry Parkinson. Senator Joe Donnelly's office, very good supporter of the veterans here in our local area. We certainly appreciate that. Today we're here to participate in the Veterans History Project, to conduct and preserve stories and documents to be submitted to the Library of Congress American Folklore Center. These personal accounts of American wartime veterans are to be recorded so future generations can hear directly from veterans and better understand the realities of the war. We ask ourselves, and maybe a part of our young audience will question, why is history important? Well, it helps us understand our society. The events that shaped who we are today is incredibly important. Hearing the stories of those who came before us can inspire us to take action in our own lives today. History helps us understand change. The events that lead up to both world wars help us to understand how a small event can set off a large series of changes. History is a giant, interesting story that leads up to each of us, our relatives, our families, and our heritage. History teaches us to recognize the warning signs leading up to horrors like the Holocaust and allows us to fight against them early so they can never happen again. And finally, history helps us to understand suffering, joy, and chaos. It helps us to understand the world and what shaped it. It helps us to be better people. Here today, this is about history. So let us continue.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. And then up next is Dr. Vaughn DeCoster, Professor of Social Work at the University of Southern Indiana. All right, he's still talking right now, so we'll catch up with him later. We're going to go ahead and talk with Jerry Parkinson, the Executive Director in Evansville, Indiana, for U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly.
Thank you all. Aren't you glad we're not outside today? Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be here on behalf of Senator Donnelly, and it's definitely been a pleasure working with Clint Perry and Greg Coburn from the VA Evansville Health Center on making this day happen. It's a special day here at the Freedom Heritage Museum, so we thank Dr. Browning for working with those two folks to make this happen. So it's not by accident that Clint Perry organized this event to take place in May today, as we celebrate both Military Appreciation Month, Armed Forces Recognition Day last Saturday, and then obviously Memorial Day coming up on Monday. Since he took office in 2013, Senator Donnelly has made it a top priority to have Veterans History Projects in each county across the state. And that's where I met Clint last fall in Jasper. He was a volunteer for a Veterans History Project Senator Donnelly had hosted. And it wasn't long after he and Greg Coburn were in the Evansville office asking, how can we make this happen in Evansville? What do we have to do? And here we are after, I could only say, countless hours of Clint's work, organization, and effort that we're here today. So a little bit about the Veterans History Project. It started in the year 2000 as an act of Congress to collect and preserve the intimate histories of duty, service, sacrifice, travail, and triumphs of our armed services men and women, and also the civilians who supported them, such as here in Evansville, on so many different critical projects for our Defense Department. These stories are logged into the Library of Congress and the National Archives for anybody to view, whether it's a historian or a teacher, professor, or the general public, just for their future knowledge and recognition of the service and sacrifice that these men and women gave for our freedoms and the liberties that we enjoy today. So whenever Clint reached out, I reached out to the senator and asked that we have the senator write a letter to the group here today, and the senator writes this. Today we come together to hear the men and women who courageously served our country tell their moving stories of service. It's important we record their statements so that future generations have the opportunity to learn from these experiences and appreciate the sacrifices made to protect our freedoms. With the Veterans History Project, we recognize and thank the veterans in attendance and all of our nation's veterans including the 500,000 Hoosier veterans who served to protect our country. The brave men and women of our military truly demonstrate what it means to be a citizen and a patriot. We are thankful for your service, the freedoms we cherish, the country we love, and the values we stand for. In Indiana, our veterans exemplify the best of Hoosier values, and we should all take some time to thank those who have served, whether it's here today at the Veterans History Project, at the supermarket, or at church on Sunday. We all need to let our veterans and their families know how much we appreciate their service and sacrifice. Today, just days before Memorial Day, we reflect on and honor the courageous men and women of our armed forces who lost their lives serving in the line of duty. We will stand beside every military family for the heavy weight they often carry, for their service to this great nation. We will never forget your loved ones and the sacrifices they've made to this country. We'll always be grateful to American heroes, the servicemen and women in the armed forces, and their loved ones. We thank all in uniform for standing watch and honor the memory of all who are no longer with us for their bravery, courage, and patriotism. May God bless our military families. May God bless Indiana, and may God bless America. Sincerely, U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Parkinson. And now we are going to speak with Dr. Vaughn DeCoster, Professor of Social Work at the University of Southern Indiana.
Well, is everybody comfortable? You're all pretty relaxed? You give a professor a microphone, and Clint said I got an hour. You want an hour? All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, and I'm really very pleased and honored to be here, today. I think it's remarkable what our Navy foreman, Clint Perry's been able to pull off and to bring together. So I think hearing these stories, for veterans, young and old, is just incredibly important. And as an academic, it's important because a lot of this, like the senator's staffer said, that a lot of this information, all this goes to the Library of Congress. It's researchable and it's stuff that can be carried forward, and generations can understand what it's like to serve our country. So, I am a professor. I've been a professor since 1996, so quite a while. And most adjectives that come to mind when you think about a college professor in a liberal arts college probably come to mind. I know what you're thinking. I vote for that one side. However, I did answer the call to service, which makes it interesting is because those that serve are a very diverse population. What I did was I was a clinical social worker in the Army Reserve. So I was a tenured professor at the University of Arkansas at the time, and they were looking for clinicians, for mental health providers, to provide services, to provide care. And so I spent 8 years in the reserve, spent a year downrange in the big sandbox. I was there during the surge in Baghdad from 2006 to 2007. What we're doing now in military healthcare and medicine and psychiatry is we go forward. Vietnam and before, folks that had combat stress would go to the rear. What we know now is we go to them. And so I provided care to about 7,200 soldiers in our area of operation. We supported the 2 VCT, 2ID out of Fort Carson. So that's the 2nd Brigade Combat Team of the 2nd Infantry Division. It was a pretty small FOB, or forward operating base, that we worked out of, but we covered 8. So we were spread pretty thin. I was a care provider in the military. A care provider. It wasn't a trigger pull. Even though when you're in the Army, everybody qualifies. Everybody, you're going to carry, no matter who you are, what you do. You're going to qualify with the weapons. So what I was surprised about is how the military is embracing mental health veterans. And they're doing so for kind of 2 reasons. One is to maintain operational strength. If We can take care of combat stress, which is common across all conflicts. Typically, for every one injured person, there's about 7 that have some type of combat stress. But the Army embracing it, just to kind of give you a little bit of my story, is that it was amazing because we worked with Special Forces a lot. They were involved with the MIT teams, NIP teams, these small advising teams that worked with Iraqi police, which is their version of the National Guard and their Army. And so they would actually come get us. The Special Forces guys would come get us, and we'd help them work through some of the challenging things that they experienced. Because it had been Special Forces, they lived with the Iraqi armies. It was great. You felt very safe there because the bad guys didn't mortar the Iraqi bases because, it's their cousins, it's their friends, they wouldn't do that. But then bad things started to happen to those Special Forces on those bases. They were captured and beheaded and things like that. The other thing that was kind of telling about the Army embracing this mental health staff is first sergeants. Those of you in the Army, you know what a first sergeant's like. They would hand walk their soldiers that needed care to see us. And not in a punitive way, they wanted to make sure that they got care. The other thing that was kind of telling about the changing atmosphere of the military today, and it's really embracing mental health, is the brigade commander. Over the entire brigade, it's no 6, a colonel. We had priority with flight ops. To put that in perspective, unless it was a combat mission, if we needed to get to a base to provide care to a group of soldiers, we had 2 Black Hawks at our call 24/7, everything else got comped. Doesn't matter if you were going home, if you were on leave, if you were mental health care, myself and another tech, we took those 2 Black Hawks and we had priority. The most telling is one time I was at a bug meeting, battle update briefing, giving my little dog and pony show to the battalion commander who had just come into theater and telling him what we did and all that good stuff. And the battalion commander, all of his company commanders were there, first sergeants and his XO. And he said, at the time I was a captain, he said, "Captain, I want you to do me a favor." Of course, we didn't tell the battalion commander except, "Yes, sir." And he said, if you hear of anyone having difficulty coming to see you, getting any type of grief, any type of problems, I want you to tell me immediately, regardless of what time of day, because I'm going to, quote, F and fire that person on the spot. Of course, he used the language that would be fitting for a combat zone, and it was dead silence. And we had 0 problems with soldiers wanting to see us, that support. But what we were doing is hearing their stories, like we're doing today. We were letting veterans, who were then active duty Army, Navy, because they were Navy guys, and they were really confused why they were in the big sandbox when they were supposed to be out at sea. And we saw some Marines, airmen, letting them tell their stories. And I've been at the VA. I've worked in the PCT program, which is for post-traumatic stress. I've run a vet center. I continue to practice and do trauma work. And it's all about letting someone tell their story. Because here's the interesting thing, is that in most of my vets, you may or may not agree, but the ones that I've talked to in all these different places, is going to war is easy. It's the coming home and living with it that's hard. It's when things get quiet that it gets difficult. Because you develop kind of a new normal when you go over there. And sometimes it's hard to readjust what has become normal being downrange to what's normal at home. And we see that because even today, our new vets are having difficulty because a lot of people don't want to hear their stories. With PTSD, with substance abuse, with domestic violence, with the divorce rate, we all know that these things, as a professor, I know the research shows that it's much higher than folks that haven't served. We know the suicide rate overall for veterans is what per day? Anyone know the number of vets?
I believe it's 22, right?
22. Now they're looking at that number. It's not necessarily the younger vets that are committing suicide. Because as a clinician, I know it's the more, we won't say older, we'll say mature vets that are committing suicide. Part of it is no one's hearing their stories. When we would do these debriefing with folks that were redeploying, so they were OCONUS, they were in Iraq, and they were getting ready to come home. The redeployment briefings we would do it when they were demobbing, coming out of if you're guard or reserve. We would warn them. We would warn them the 30-second rule. Most people want to hear 30 seconds. That's it. After that, their eyes kind of glaze over. You can tell they're not paying attention. They'll ask you the dumb questions. A, have you shot anybody? B, have you been shot? It's like, okay. So 30 seconds. And I have to say, when I came back, that 30-second rule still applied. And I was surrounded by doctoral level social workers, psychologists, all these folks. And I could tell they wanted 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's it. That's very frustrating when you go through a life experience, especially serving downrange and wanting to share your story. And most people just don't want to hear it. And I don't think that's anything necessarily new, because people also hear what they want to hear. People will hear what they want to hear. We have this belief that when our World War II vets came home, everything was golden. They just changed like that. It's not true. It's not true. And I think it's kind of disrespectful to think that way. How do you go through those experiences? How do you do some of the things that you've done and it not affect you? I had a consult to see a World War II vet who was dying in a nursing home that the staff thought he was PTSD. He had new PTSD. So I went, was going to do my assessment, started to, I talked with him, and he still had the same wife, which that's good. Vietnam vets tend to, swap out wives sometimes because it's hard in the readjustment. But he had the same wife, and his kids and grandkids were there, and they were like, well, where's this coming from? He's never had any problems. His wife was very quiet in the corner. She just shook her head. She said, you don't remember, but he wasn't the same for 10 years after he came back. And he drank a lot. He was really angry. Was he not normal? Well, from my experience, he was normal. It was normal. But probably a lot of folks either heard his story or didn't really want to remember it the years that followed, because again, we hear it, but we don't really want to hear it. The other crazy thing that happens is that there's times when, I don't know if my fellow vets, do you ever have a moment where you want to go back? Ever had that? When it hit me when I was back home, and because I'm very lucky. I've got an incredibly, I've got a very attractive wife. I got very lucky. I don't know what she sees in me. That's the cute blonde, not the bald guy. And this was shortly after I returned. Now my sons are big. My one son's at Mater Dei, the other one's at Resurrection. And when I first come back, I remembered that thought where I got to go back down range. I can't be here anymore. I've got to go back. And it took me a while to figure that out, because what helped is with my colleagues that didn't want to hear my story, I'd go hang out with ROTC folks because we could talk the same language. And this is from a professor, remember, one of those kind of people. Well, all of a sudden it's hanging out with ROTC folks because I felt normal around them. And here's, what we figured out is that, the Army's a bureaucratic monster. There's so much of it you just want to forget because it's just crazy. But what we miss and the stories that we tell often involve people. That's what I miss about service. And that's why I like being around you people, meaning other vets, is it's you that we miss. Because you know the reality. We don't fight for God and country. Now, that makes movies and it sells books. We fight for each other. We don't run into harm's way because we're protecting our home, because thank God we haven't had to do that. We run in harm's way because of a friend or a colleague, somebody that we're over there with, our Army family. And some of the things that I remember is we never leave somebody behind. These are two of my friends from my time at Vaughn DeCoster. And whether it's the battlefield or the going to get chow, going to the DFAC, the dining facility, we never left somebody behind. It was interesting. Never. If you were going to go eat, you always made sure nobody was left behind. Nobody. Sometimes I wanted to be left behind. I'd go to the chow hall, and next thing you know, first sergeant, hey, sir, what are you doing? I'm like, I just want a break. But we never left anybody behind. Even when you were a CONUS, when you were back here in Garrison, you saw someone walking, we'd always stop and offer them a ride. Are we leaving vets behind? I don't know. I wonder what are we doing as far as employment? What type of, we do these events, and we're doing more with employment, then we need to do even more, But again, not leaving somebody behind is something that I can recall. The other thing is, in the stories that I hear is that a lot of the military folks are just incredibly dependable. I know you can see that this is me and Sergeant Williams. He was my NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, because I had 5 young specialists, 1 psychiatrist that was underneath me, and man, those specialists, oh my gosh, I'd go, Sergeant Williams, I got specialist so-and-so, you got to do something with her. Got it, sir, no problem. Sergeant Williams, I need help with this. Got it, no problem. He would take care of it. He would read my mind. Every once in a while, I said, Sergeant Williams, he's good. Don't worry, sir, we got some corrective training planned. Okay, you guys can fill in the gaps. I didn't want to know what the corrective training was, but I'll tell you, that soldier came back, he was a new person. So my wife got tired. She said, well, you ought to just marry Sergeant Williams. I get tired of hearing about your NCOIC. Because I'm like, why can't you just got stuff done? So, and we all know who runs the Army. Well, it ain't me, and that's not the officers. It's, good NCO. A smart officer will do what the NCO says. A good NCO will just let the officer think he knows what he's doing. The other thing that I miss is that sense of family, the Army family. We heard it all the time in Garrison. They'd say, we're family. Ooh. And okay, that's kind of it's a concept. But when you're downrange, the only people you've got are these people. I mean, they become your brothers and sisters, your dads, sometimes your moms. And I had this is kind of funny because now I'm just starting to remember, the good stuff about deployment. And I had a medic that she would never figured out. She'd always come by and say, how you doing, sir? Just kind of, and I figured out she was checking up on me. And one time she ordered me, now we're at FOB Rest Alliance, very small FOB, our main FOB we worked out of, and we got mortared a lot. And one time she ordered me to go, they had salsa lessons. Don't ask me why. But there was a company from Puerto Rico, and they were doing salsa lessons. And so, of course, we got indirect fire, and so we all had to break up the salsa lessons. But I remember that sense of family. The last thing that I remember, in my story, that probably we do as well, is the sense of selfless service. We've probably heard that. It's used a lot, especially in the Army today. This is Private McGinnis. Worked with Private McGinnis, his group, a little bit. I especially worked with his commander afterwards. Let me read something about Private McGinnis. He received the Medal of Honor, and like I said, I was there the day after he gave the ultimate sacrifice. And this is from his award citation, that Private First Class Ross McGinnis distinguished himself by acts of gallantry above and beyond the call of duty, by serving as a .50 caliber machine gunner for the 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, the 1st Battalion, the 26th Infantry Regiment, in connection with combat operations in northeast Baghdad on the 4th of December 2006. That afternoon, his platoon was conducting combat control operations in an effort to reduce and control sectarian violence in the area. And while Private McGinnis was manning the M2 50 caliber machine gun, a fragmentation grenade was thrown by an insurgent. It fell into the gunner's hatch. This is a Humvee. Reacting quickly, he yelled grenade, allowing all 4 members of his crew to brace for the explosion. Then, rather than leaping from the gunner's hatch for safety, he made the courageous decision to protect his crew. In a selfless act of bravery, he put himself on the grenade and gave his life for his. So if you ever seen a Humvee when it's fully, if you got 4 soldiers, we're all bulked up with, the body armor and 210 rounds, and they have a Blue Force tractor, which is a computer system, and all the radio. There's no room, and where it fell, there was just couldn't. They're all gloved up, and then there was nothing except for him to drop. So, Private McGinnis. I was there the next day, worked with his team, because that's what we do after a death, and help them kind of get their story down. It's amazing during a trauma, your story is fragmented. We help them to have a complete story. But it's these types of amazing people, and there are hundreds of other McGinnises that I know of that maybe don't get this award, and I'm sure a lot of you know of, that their stories maybe are not being heard. And the other thing that I find reassuring, because I know we can get doubts about where this country's heading and about the younger generation. This is the younger generation. This is a 19-year-old that made this decision. Everyone's volunteered in the United States Marine, in our military service. So, again, young and old, there's some remarkable stories out there, and I hope that we'll take more than 30 seconds, and I think I'm preaching the choir to this group, but I hope we'll take more than 30 seconds to hear their stories. All right. Thank you.
Very compelling. Thank you so much for that. So we are going to have lunch, but before we do that, we want to go ahead and retrieve the colors. So the Newburgh Post 44 Honor Guard will go ahead and do that at this time.
Detail. Forward, arm. Forward, arm. Detail, hold. Retrieve colors. Present, arm. Order, arm. Forward, arm. About, face. Forward, arm.
That concludes the ceremony. Melissa, thank you so much for coming. We're going to, Mission Barbecue has a buffet line set up over here. We have hot dogs and other chips and stuff if you don't want barbecue. So if you like the drinks are in these coolers, and I'm going to move the coolers over here. So they'll be closer to the serving table. So great barbecue. Thank you so much for coming.